The Galactic Council chamber was cold. It was always cold. The temperature kept low to suit the thin-blooded Ovari delegates who melted in anything warmer than a meat locker. The walls were pale gray. The seats were arranged in a wide circle. 43 species sat in those seats, and most of them had been arguing for 3 hours straight about shipping lane taxes and mineral rights on a dead asteroid nobody actually wanted. Then the emergency light came on. It was red. A deep, ugly red that pulsed twice and then held steady above the main display screen at the center of the chamber. Every voice in the room stopped at once. 43 species, hundreds of delegates, all of them going quiet at the same moment. The way every living thing goes quiet when something in the air changes and the body understands danger before the mind catches up. Council Recorder Pell moved to the display with quick, careful steps. Pell was Ovari, tall, thin, with 6 amber eyes that could each move independently. Right now all 6 were fixed on the screen. His long fingers worked the controls without looking down at them. The display lit up. It showed a planet. Small, pale green, sitting at the very edge of charted space where the star maps got thin and the notes in the margins just said things like, Frontier Zone, low population, no strategic value. The planet had a name printed in small letters beneath it. Havelock's Reach. A human colony. Farming mostly. Wheat and root vegetables and red dirt roads. The kind of place where people woke up early and went to bed tired and did not think much about galactic politics because galactic politics did not think much about them. Pell opened the second file. The display changed. The room changed with it. The thing on the screen was enormous. Even in the still image, captured years ago by a long-range military drone before the drone was destroyed, the scale of it was hard to accept. It was dark, the color of a sky just before a serious storm, with scales that caught no light at all. Its wingspan, according to the size reference marker in the corner of the image, was wider than most mid-class cargo ships. Its head alone could have filled half the council chamber. Was a dragon. Not the small, semi-intelligent creatures found on a handful of jungle worlds. Not the decorative fire lizards kept as pets by wealthy families on Veth Prime. This was a draconeth. A true one, ancient and enormous and built by millions of years of evolution into something that had no natural predators anywhere in the known galaxy because nothing had ever been fast enough, strong enough, or simply alive long enough to become one. Below the image, in red letters, was the file designation. Vorax the Ashen. Draconeth classification, Elder. Last confirmed survivor of his kind. Threat level, extinction class. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then everybody spoke at once. The Moran delegate was on his feet first, his forearms all moving at once, his translator unit struggling to keep up with how fast he was talking. He wanted bombardment. Immediate, total, orbital. He had a cousin who had served on one of the warships Vorax had destroyed 18 years ago. He did not say this out loud but everyone could see it in his face. The Valari representative pulled up the historical record and began reading it aloud, not because anyone needed her to but because the numbers, said clearly in a quiet voice, had a way of making people understand things that images alone could not. 2 warships. Gone. Not damaged, gone, reduced to fields of floating debris that search teams had spent 4 months sifting through. A weapons depot on a moon called Shar's Rock. Cracked open from the inside after Vorax had torn through 3 reinforced walls to get out of the containment unit they had tried to seal him in. The moon was still uninhabitable from the heat damage. A ground engagement on the colony world of Perith, where a full military unit of 300 soldiers in combat armor had attempted to capture him using a coordinated net and sedative operation that military planners had spent 2 years designing. The operation had lasted 11 minutes. Nobody had gotten within 300 meters of him. The soldiers who survived said later that it was not the fire that stopped them, it was something else, something that hit the body before the mind had time to process it, a pressure in the chest and a roaring in the ears that turned trained fighters into running animals on pure instinct. Scientists had studied it afterward. They called it threat pheromone response. They wrote papers about it. The papers all reached the same conclusion, which was that there was no known protective equipment that fully blocked it and no known training that fully overcame it, and that the most honest advice they could give to anyone who encountered Vorax in the field was to be somewhere else. The Moran delegate was still talking about bombardment. 3 others had joined him now. The logic was simple, they said. The math was simple. 1 creature, alone, on a low-population farming world at the edge of space. 1 orbital strike. Clean, fast, finished. The colony would be compensated. The humans would understand. Everyone would be safer. Pell waited until the noise dropped slightly, then raised one long hand. The creature crash-landed, he said. His voice was calm and dry the way it always was. The impact crater suggests he came down at high speed and did not pull up. He may be severely injured. Good, said the Moran delegate. It means, Pell continued without reacting, that he may not be mobile. Which means the colony population can be fully evacuated before any action is taken. He paused. We should do that first. There was a short argument about whether evacuation was worth the time it would take. The argument ended when a human delegate named Prue stood up from the back row, said 4 words, "There are children there," and sat back down. The room went quiet again. The evacuation order was approved. The signal went out immediately, pushed through every relay tower and communication satellite in the Havelock's reach system. Emergency tones lit up every comm device on the colony, the ones in the town center, the ones in the school, the ones clipped to belts and sitting on kitchen tables and charging on windowsills across 300 square kilometers of farmland. Shuttles launched from the colony's small port. Families came out of their houses in a hurry, grabbing children and dogs and the things that mattered most and moving fast toward the pickup points. The roads filled with dust as vehicles moved toward the center of town. People were frightened but they moved. Humans were good at moving when they needed to, good at making quick decisions and not standing around debating when the alarm was real. In the council chamber, Pell watched the evacuation reports come in one by one. Region by region. Sector by sector. The numbers climbed, 60% evacuated, 70-80. He did not notice at first that the Eastern Ridge sector was not reporting. The relay tower on the Eastern Ridge had been damaged in a storm 7 days earlier. A maintenance request had been filed. It was sitting in a queue somewhere, waiting for a technician who had not yet been assigned. Nobody had flagged it as urgent because nobody had expected an extinction-class dragon to fall out of the sky onto a wheat farm the same week. The signal never reached the eastern farmsteads. In the warm kitchen of a pale yellow house at the end of a long red dirt road, a man named Neil Holt was fixing the water pump and had no idea anything was wrong. His older son Sam was on the porch reading. The family dog was asleep under the table. And 7-year-old Ren Holt was standing at the back gate, looking out across the wheat field at the long black scorch mark in the sky where something enormous had fallen, leaving a trail of smoke that was only now beginning to thin. She stood there for a moment, the way she always did when she was deciding something. Then she opened the gate and walked toward it. The back gate made a small clicking sound as Ren pushed it shut behind her. She did not run. Ren was not a runner by nature. She was a watcher, the kind of child who stood at windows during rainstorms and counted the seconds between lightning and thunder, who crouched down to look at beetles crossing the path instead of stepping over them. Her father said she had been born curious. Her brother Sam said she was just slow. Ren thought they were both a little bit right. The wheat on this side of the fence was tall, taller than her head in most places, the stalks thick and gold green, rustling softly even though there was almost no wind. She pushed through it with both arms, the way she always did, feeling the dry edges brush against her jacket sleeves. The ground under her boots was hard and dry. It had not rained in 2 weeks. The smell hit her before she could see anything. It was sharp and strange, like the time Sam had left a metal pan on the stove too long and the whole kitchen had filled with that hot, burnt, metallic smell, but much stronger. Much bigger. The kind of smell that did not come from a kitchen. The kind that came from something serious. The wheat ended. Ren stopped at the edge of it and looked. The field in front of her was gone. Not flattened, gone, burned down to the soil, which had been scorched so hard it had turned dark and cracked in long lines like old paint drying. The burned area was wide, wider than the farmhouse and the barn put together, spreading out in a rough shape from a deep central point where the earth had been pushed down and split open by something landing very fast and very hard. And in the middle of it all was Vorax. Ren had seen pictures of Draconeth in her school reader. One picture, small, on the corner of a page with a red warning border and a note underneath that said, "Do not approach, extreme danger, notify authorities immediately." The picture had made him look frightening in a flat, distant way, the way pictures of deep ocean creatures looked frightening. Real but not real to her, not part of her world. This was her world. He was enormous in a way that the picture had not prepared her for. His body filled most of the crater, dark scales pressing into the burned earth. One massive wing folded badly beneath him at a wrong angle, the other spread out to his side like a collapsed sail. His tail stretched back so far she could not see where it ended in the haze of still rising heat. His neck was long and thick, lying against the ground, and his head was resting in the dirt with his chin down, the way a dog rested when it was tired or sick. He was bleeding. Not red. Silver, a thick, slow silver that seeped from 3 long cracks in the scales along his left side and one deep gash near the joint where the broken wing met his body. It moved slowly, too slowly, pooling in the cracks of the scorched earth beneath him. Wren had seen animals bleed before. She had helped her father with a sheep that had torn itself on the fence wire once. She knew what it looked like when something had lost too much. She stood at the edge of the burned circle for a moment. She thought about going back to get her father. She thought about it seriously, the way her father had taught her to think about things. Look at the situation, decide what it needs, then act. She looked at the situation. It needed help. Her father was good at help. But her father was on the other side of the farm, and by the time she ran back and explained and he came out here, that could be a long time. And the thing in front of her was bleeding silver and its breathing was slow and wrong. She looked to her left. Just inside the wheat, where the burned edge had not reached, a small patch of wildflowers had survived. The little yellow ones her mother used to call sundots, small and cheerful, growing in a loose cluster between the wheat stalks as if they had decided that particular patch of ground was theirs. Wren reached down and picked a small handful. Then she walked into the burned circle. She walked slowly. Not because she was afraid, or not only because she was afraid, but because something in the back of her mind said clearly that fast movements were not the right choice here. She kept her arms loose at her sides. She kept her face calm. She watched where she stepped on the cracked earth. She moved the way she moved around the sheep when they were nervous, steady and quiet, nothing sudden. She got to about 2 meters from his nose and stopped. Up close, the size of him was almost too big to think about properly. The single nostril nearest to her was wider than her shoulders. The scales on his nose were dark gray at the edges and almost black in the center, and up close she could see they were not flat. They had a faint texture to them, overlapping like roof tiles, each one slightly different from the next. There was a scar running across the bridge of his nose, old and pale, healed long ago into a smooth ridge. She could feel the heat coming off him even from 2 meters away. Not burning, just warm, the way the side of the farmhouse felt on a summer afternoon when the stone had been sitting in the sun all day. She sat down cross-legged in the dirt. The ground was warm under her. She set the wildflowers in her lap and looked at him. His chest was rising and falling in those long, uneven pulls, each breath rattling somewhere deep inside him like something loose. His eyes were closed. The silver bleeding on his side had not stopped. "You look really hurt," she said. Her voice came out soft and clear in the quiet. There was no wind now. Nothing moving in the wheat. Just the faint distant sound of something, maybe a shuttle, far away, and her own voice and his breathing. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the eye opened. It was on the near side of his head, large as a dinner plate, and the color of it stopped her breath for just a second. Not because it was frightening, though it was, but because it was beautiful in the way that fire was beautiful, that deep ember orange red that held light inside it rather than reflecting it. The pupil was vertical, sharp, and it moved, adjusting, focusing, settling on her face with a precision that made it very clear that whatever else was wrong with him, his eyes worked perfectly. He looked at her. She looked back. She had expected something in that look, anger or the flat cold blankness of a predator sizing up something small. She had been ready for that, or as ready as a 7-year-old could be. What she had not been ready for was what was actually there, which was something she did not have a precise word for but recognized anyway, the way you recognized a feeling in someone's face before you were old enough to name it. He was tired. Not sleepy tired. The other kind. The deep kind that lived in the bones and did not go away after a night's rest. The kind that came from carrying something heavy for so long that you had forgotten what it felt like not to. Wren sat with that for a moment. Then she held up the wildflowers just slightly so he could see them clearly. "I brought you these," she said. "I know you probably can't do anything with them. I just thought," she paused, thinking about it honestly, "I just thought it seemed right to bring something." The great eye did not move from her face. His breathing was still uneven. The silver was still bleeding. The broken wing was still bent the wrong way. None of that had changed. But he had not moved. He had not made a sound. He had not done the thing that every military file and every council report and every red-bordered page and every school reader said he always did when something came close. For 200 years, everything that had approached Vorax the Ashen had come holding a weapon. The small human child sitting cross-legged in the dirt 2 meters from his nose was holding a handful of yellow wildflowers, slightly wilted, with a smear of field dirt on her jacket sleeve and her boots tied with mismatched laces. He looked at her for a long time. And he did not look away. The drone was small enough to fit in a coat pocket. That was the point of it. The Council's reconnaissance models were built to be invisible, matte black casing, near-silent propulsion, designed to observe without being observed. It had been launched from a relay satellite above Havelock's reach the moment the evacuation order was confirmed, and it had crossed the distance to the eastern farmsteads in just under 20 minutes, flying low and steady through pale morning air. It found the crater without difficulty. The scorch marks were visible from 2 kilometers out. The drone's onboard system ran its standard arrival sequence: atmospheric scan, heat mapping, structural survey of the surrounding area. All of that data uploaded automatically to the Council's tactical display in a quiet stream of numbers and color-coded readings. But the optical feed, the live camera, the actual picture of what was on the ground, that went directly to the main screen in the center of the chamber. Council Recorder Pell was the first one to see it. He was standing at his station on the left side of the chamber, reviewing the evacuation completion numbers, when the main screen changed. He looked up. He looked at the feed for a long moment without saying anything. Then very quietly he said, "Everyone needs to look at this." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. There was something in the flatness of it, something careful and controlled, that made the nearest delegates turn immediately. And once 2 people were looking, the rest followed, the way attention always spreads in a room. 1 person, then 3, then 10, then all of them. The argument about bombardment logistics dying mid-sentence as delegate after delegate turned to face the screen. The main chamber went silent. On the screen, in the sharp clear resolution of the drone's optical sensor, was the crater. And in the crater was Vorax, dark, enormous, broken-winged, bleeding silver into the cracked earth. Every delegate who had seen the file photos recognized him immediately. Every threat assessment system tied to the drone's feed was running in the background, the numbers visible in a small panel at the bottom right of the display. Pheromone output, core temperature, muscular tension indicators based on scale movement patterns. All of them high. All of them confirming that yes, this was Vorax, and yes, he was dangerous, and yes, every instinct in every trained soldier's body would be screaming to run right now if they were standing anywhere near him. And sitting 2 meters from his nose, cross-legged in the burned dirt, was a small human child. The Moran delegate made a sound. It was not a word. The child was talking. The drone's audio sensors were good, designed to pick up whispered conversations through walls, and in the open air of the crater they caught her voice clearly, feeding it through the chamber speakers so that 43 species could hear a 7-year-old human girl speaking in a soft, steady voice to the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy. She was telling him about the farm. Not about the evacuation, not about the council, not about the warships he had destroyed or the soldiers he had scattered. She was telling him that the wheat on the south side had been coming in well this year, and that there was a bird that had built a nest in the broken water trough near the fence, and her father kept saying he would fix the trough but had not fixed it yet because he did not want to disturb the nest. She was talking the way you talk to someone who was hurt and scared and needed to hear a calm voice more than they needed to hear anything important. Commander Sale watched from the bridge of her ship, 300 kilometers above the planet's surface. She had her arms folded and her jaw tight, and she had not blinked in almost a minute. She had spent 9 years studying Vorax. She had read every file, every field report, every survivor account. She had built her entire career around understanding him well enough to stop him. She had never seen him be still like this. His pheromone output should have been filling the entire crater. At his size, at his threat level, the involuntary chemical response alone should have been enough to cause physical symptoms in any living thing within 50 meters. Elevated heart rate, tunnel vision, the overwhelming physical need to be somewhere else. It was not a conscious weapon. It was just what he was, built into him the same way heat was built into fire. The numbers on the drone sensor panel were not matching that. They were high. They were still concerning. But they were not what they should have been for a cornered, injured Draconeth with something approaching him. They were lower. And as Sale watched the feed and watched the numbers, she realized they had been dropping steadily since the drone arrived. Since before the drone arrived, most likely. Since the child sat down. On the screen, Ren shifted slightly, leaning forward onto her knees. She had stopped talking about the bird's nest. She was looking at Vorax's face with an expression that the drone's camera caught in clear detail. Not the careful blankness of someone trying to appear unafraid, but something more honest than that. She was looking at him the way Sale had seen medics look at patients in the field. Focused, concerned, trying to figure out what was needed. The great ember-colored eye was open and looking back at her. Ren reached out slowly. Both hands moving carefully, the way you moved around something you did not want to startle. She placed them on either side of his jaw, which was larger than her entire body, with a gentleness that was almost careful to the point of ceremony. She held them there for a moment. In the council chamber, nobody breathed. Then she leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to the top of his nose. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. She pulled back and sat on her heels, still holding his jaw in both small hands, and looked at him with that same focused, honest expression. Every sensor on the drone hit the floor. Not gradually. Not in the slow downward curve they had been following for the past several minutes. All at once. Pheromone output, tension indicators, thermal aggression readings, all of them dropping to the lowest recorded levels any monitoring system had ever captured from a living Draconeth. The numbers sat there on the bottom right panel of the screen, very small and very clear, and they said what they said, and nobody in the chamber could argue with them because numbers did not have feelings and did not get confused and did not make mistakes. Vorax the Ashen, in the presence of a 7-year-old human child who had just kissed him on the nose, was calmer than any record suggested he had ever been. His eyes were closed. The Moran delegate sat down very slowly, as if his legs had made the decision without consulting him. At the tactical display, the bombardment countdown was still running in the background. A small timer in the corner of the secondary screen, ticking down in quiet, precise increments toward the point where the order would need to be confirmed or cancelled. Someone cancelled it. Later, when the council reviewed the session logs, nobody could clearly identify who had pressed the button. 3 different administrators were listed in the system as having been at that station at that moment. All 3 of them, when asked separately, said they thought one of the others had done it. Nobody pushed to find out. Pell stood at his station and watched the feed and said nothing for a long time. He was Ovari. His species had been traveling the stars for 4,000 years, long enough to have seen most things at least once and to have stopped being surprised by most of them. He had sat in this chamber through trade wars and species first contact events and the kind of political crises that rewrote galactic law. He had a reputation for stillness, for calm, for being the person in the room who did not react until he had thought carefully about what the correct reaction was. He watched the small human girl sitting with her hands on the dragon's jaw, and the dragon with his eyes closed and his breathing slower and more even than it had been since the drone arrived, and the silver bleeding on his side that had, very slightly, begun to slow. Pell had 6 eyes. All 6 of them were on the screen. After a long time, the delegate from Veth Prime, an older woman named Counselor Dara, spoke quietly from her seat 2 stations down. "Has anyone," she said, "contacted the child's parents yet?" Pell considered the screen for another moment. "No," he said. "Someone should," she said. "Yes," Pell said. "Someone should." Neither of them moved immediately. The feed kept playing. The numbers stayed low. Somewhere on a small farming world at the edge of charted space, a little girl was talking again, her voice coming through the drone's speakers soft and clear and completely unafraid. It started as a feeling. Not a thought, not a voice, not anything Ren could have described properly if someone had asked her to. It was more like the way a smell could pull up a memory without warning, the way the scent of her grandmother's kitchen could suddenly make her feel 6 years old again, small and warm and safe, before she even had time to think about it. Except this was not her memory. And it did not feel warm. It felt very, very old. She was still sitting on her heels with her hands resting lightly on Vorax's jaw when it started. His eyes had closed a few minutes ago. His breathing had evened out somewhat, still not right, still too slow and too careful the way breathing got when moving hurt, but better than it had been. The silver bleeding on his side had slowed to an occasional thick drop rather than a steady seep. Ren had been talking quietly, filling the silence with small things, the way she did when she sat with the farm dog during thunderstorms. She had told him about the wheat, about the broken water trough, about the way the light came through the kitchen window in the early morning and made a long gold stripe across the floor that the cat always slept in. Then the feeling came and she stopped talking. It was not frightening. That was the first thing she noticed. It should have been, maybe, something that large and that strange moving into the edges of her thoughts should have felt like an intrusion. But it did not. It felt more like standing in an open field and feeling the wind change direction. Something shifting. Something that had been facing away slowly turning toward her. The first thing she felt was open sky. Not Havelock's Reach sky, not the pale familiar blue she had looked up at every day of her life. This was different. Deeper. A sky with more color in it, layered in ways she had no words for, and it was very high up because whatever she was seeing it through was very high up, moving through it easily the way a fish moved through water. The feeling of it was physical, wind on scales, the pull and push of air under wings, the particular freedom of something that was built for height living in height. It lasted only a moment. Then it changed. She felt others. Not clearly. Not like faces or voices. More like warmth at different points around her, the way you felt the presence of people in a dark room before you could see them. Several of them, close, familiar, the kind of familiar that did not need explaining because it had always been there, the way your own hands were familiar. She understood without being told that these were his own kind. Not just his species. His family. The feeling of them was the warmest thing she had ever felt that was not her own. Then they were gone. It did not happen slowly. One moment the warmth was there, surrounding and complete, and the next it was simply not, the way a candle went out, not fading but stopping, a hard edge between before and after. And what was left was a cold that was not about temperature. It was a cold that lived in the space where warmth had been and understood very precisely what it had lost. Ren felt her throat tighten. She saw, or felt or understood, the line between those things had gone blurry. Ships. Many of them, far more than she had ever seen in one place, filling the sky of a world that was not Havelock's reach. She felt something that translated in her chest as wrong, wrong, this is wrong, the way it felt when you walked into a room and knew immediately that something bad had happened there even before you understood what. Then heat. Then silence. Then nothing where the warmth had been. And then a very long time of just sky. Empty sky, world after world, the kind of time that piled up so slowly it stopped feeling like time and started feeling like weather, something you lived inside rather than something that passed. 200 years did not mean much to Ren in numbers. But she felt the length of it the way you felt the length of a very long road when you were tired and could not see the end. She came back to herself slowly. Her hands were still on his jaw. Her knees were starting to ache from the hard ground. The sun had moved, not much, but enough that the shadow of the wheat fell differently across the burned earth than it had when she sat down. Voryx's eye was open again, looking at her. Ren sat with what she had felt for a moment. She turned it over carefully, the way she turned over interesting rocks she found in the field, looking at all the sides of it. She thought about the warmth that had been there and then was not. She thought about the long cold sky after. She thought about 200 years of that, and she was 7 years old and could not really hold 200 years in her head as a real thing, but she could hold the feeling of it, and the feeling was enough. She reached into the front pocket of her jacket. It was a small pocket, the kind that was more decorative than useful, but Ren had always used it for things she wanted to keep close. Right now it held 3 things: a smooth gray stone she had found in the creek, a folded piece of paper with a drawing on it that Sam had made for her birthday, and the ceramic bird. She took the bird out carefully. It fit in her palm. It was pale blue, glazed smooth, with a round body and small detailed wings and a tiny painted eye on each side of its head. Her grandmother had given it to her 2 years ago, brought it back from a market on the station near Veth Prime, told her it was made by hand on a world where that particular shade of blue was considered lucky. 8 months ago Ren had dropped it on the kitchen floor. The left wing had snapped off cleanly at the joint, a neat break, and the wing itself had skidded under the refrigerator where it had taken her 10 minutes to retrieve it with a broom handle. She had cried for a while. Then she had put both pieces in her pocket and kept them there, and eventually she had stopped carrying the wing separately and just carried the bird, the one that was missing a wing, because it was still the same bird. She held it up in front of his nose, low and slow so he could see it clearly. He looked at it. Both pieces, the body with its clean-edged break where the wing should have been. "I broke this," Ren said. Her voice was quiet and straightforward, the way it always was when she was saying something she had thought about. "I dropped it and the wing came off and I cried about it. My brother said I should throw it away because it was broken." She paused. "I didn't though." She turned it slightly in her fingers. "Because it was still the same bird. It was just also broken." She set it down carefully in the dirt in front of his nose, in the small space between his chin and the cracked earth. He looked at it for a long time. Ren sat back and waited. She was good at waiting. She had a lot of practice. The exhale came without warning. Not fire, not exactly. The breath that came out of Voryx was not flame, but it carried everything flame was made of, the deep heat from somewhere far down in him, and it rolled out across the ground in a wave that moved in every direction at once. The dirt, already dark and hard from the crash, took that heat and changed, turning black, then darker than black, the surface going smooth and glassy in a wide ring around them both, like the ground had briefly become something else and then hardened back into itself. The heat hit Ren's face like opening an oven door. She felt it on her cheeks, her forehead, her hands. Her eyes watered from it. The wildflowers in her lap turned brown at the edges and then crumbled. The air in front of her face shimmered and bent. She did not move. She squinted against it and kept her hands loose in her lap and stayed exactly where she was, because she understood somehow, not from reading, not from anything anyone had told her, but from the feeling that had moved through her a few minutes ago, that this was not anger. This was not a warning. This was grief. The kind that had been held in for so long that when it finally came out, it came out as heat and glass and scorched earth because there was no other shape it could take anymore. When the air cooled, she opened her eyes fully again. The ceramic bird was still there in the dirt. Unburned. In the direct path of the breath, small and pale blue, sitting in the center of the glassy ground without a mark on it. Ren looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up at Vorax. His eye was closed again. But his breathing was different now. Slower. Deeper. The kind of slow and deep that was not wrong. That was the sound of something that had been carrying a weight for a very long time finally, just slightly putting part of it down. Ren pulled her jacket tighter and stayed where she was. She did not say anything else for a while. Sometimes the right thing was not more words. She knew that from the thunderstorms and the farm dog. Sometimes the right thing was just staying. So she stayed. Neil Holt found the back gate open. That was the first thing. The gate was open and the latch was swinging loose and the ground on the other side showed small boot prints in the dry dirt heading straight into the wheat. He knew those boot prints. He had bought those boots 3 months ago at the supply station, the ones with the mismatched laces because Ren had insisted on one red and one blue and he had not had the energy to argue about it. He had been at the south water pump for 40 minutes. He had come back to find Sam asleep on the porch and the kitchen empty and the back gate open. And then the neighbor's emergency radio had crackled to life 2 fields over with a sound that made every hair on his arms stand up. He did not stop to wake Sam. He went through the gate at a run. The wheat was tall and he pushed through it with his arms up, following the small boot prints and the smell that got stronger and stranger the further he went, that sharp burnt metallic smell that was nothing like anything the farm produced, nothing like anything he had smelled before in his life. The wheat ended and he stopped hard at the edge of it, breathing fast from running, and looked at what was in front of him. He stood very still for a moment. He had seen the emergency broadcast. He knew what had landed on his farm. He had seen the file image on the neighbor's screen for about 4 seconds before he ran, and 4 seconds had been enough. He knew the size. He thought he had been prepared for the size. He was not prepared for the size. And in front of that enormous dark broken thing, sitting cross-legged in the glassy burned dirt as comfortably as she sat at the kitchen table, was his daughter. She had her jacket on. Her boots were properly tied, which surprised him slightly. She was not moving. She was just sitting there, close enough to touch the creature's nose if she leaned forward, and she was talking in the low quiet voice she used with the farm animals when they were nervous. Neil's heart was doing something complicated in his chest. He took 1 step toward her. Then he stopped because something in the picture in front of him said very clearly, "Do not rush this, do not move fast, do not change what is happening here." He did not fully understand why he listened to that feeling. He just did. He stood at the edge of the burned circle and watched his daughter sit with a dragon, and he breathed carefully and he waited. He heard the shuttle before he saw it. It came in low and fast from the north, a Volari military model, gray and angular, dropping altitude quickly in the way military craft did when they were not interested in being gentle about landing. It hit the ground 200 meters behind him in the unburned wheat field with a sound like a controlled crash, and then 6 figures came out of it moving quickly, spreading into a formation that Neil recognized from old war broadcasts. The kind of spread that covered angles, that left no gaps, that was designed around the assumption that whatever was at the center of it needed to be stopped. Commander Sale came out last. She was tall for a Volari, her 4 targeting eyes scanning the crater in rapid sequence as she walked. She had a long rifle in her hands, already raised to a ready position, and she moved the way people moved when they had done this kind enough times that their body did it without waiting for instructions. Professional. Certain. Completely focused. Her eyes found Vorax. Then they found Ren. She slowed for just a half step, barely visible, the kind of hesitation that was over before it properly started, and then she kept walking, bringing her soldiers up to the edge of the burned circle in a line. Neil moved. He stepped sideways, putting himself between Sale's line and Ren's back, and held up one hand. Not aggressive. Just present. Just, here's a person, stop moving. Sale stopped. Her 4 eyes shifted to him. "Sir, you need to move away from the target zone. This area is under Council emergency jurisdiction and..." "My daughter is 20 meters in front of you," Neil said. His voice was steady. He was surprised by how steady it was actually, because his heart was still doing that complicated thing and his hands wanted to shake, but his voice came out level and clear, the way it did when he was dealing with a serious farm problem and panic would only make it worse. "I understand that," Sale said. "Which is why I need you to call her back right now, calmly, and get her away from..." "She's been sitting there for over an hour," Neil said. Sale's jaw tightened. "Sir." "An hour," Neil said again, and something in the way he said it made Sale stop talking. "My 7-year-old daughter has been sitting 2 meters from that creature for over an hour. Look." He did not point. He did not need to. "Look at what he hasn't done." Sale looked. The crater was quiet. Vorax had not moved, not toward the soldiers, not toward Ren, not toward anything. His eyes were closed. His breathing was slow. The silver bleeding on his side had nearly stopped. The threat readings on every sensor built into Sale's armor were high, but not what they should have been, not what every file and every training briefing and every 9 years of her career said they should be for a cornered injured Draconeth with 6 armed soldiers 20 meters away. One of her soldiers shifted his footing. Just slightly, a small adjustment, boots scraping on the dry earth. Vorx moved. Not fast. Not violently. But he moved, a deep slow shift of his body, a repositioning that took less than 3 seconds and ended with his head no longer resting in the dirt but raised slightly, his neck curved in a way that placed him between the soldiers and Ren without being dramatic about it. His eyes did not open. He did not make a sound. He just moved, and when he stopped moving, the geometry of the crater had changed in a way that every soldier in Sale's line understood immediately. 2 of them took a step back without meaning to. Sale did not step back. But her hands adjusted on her rifle in a way that was not quite tightening. Ren stood up. She did it slowly, brushing the dirt off the back of her jacket with both hands, the way she did when she got up from the ground after looking at something interesting. She picked up the small ceramic bird from the dirt in front of Vorix's nose and put it back in her pocket. Then she turned around and walked toward the soldiers. She walked calmly. Completely calmly, the way she walked to school, the way she walked to the barn in the morning. She crossed the glassy burned ground and stepped over the uneven edge of the crater and stopped in the open space between Vorix and Sale's rifle line, about halfway between them, and looked up at Sale. Sale looked down at her. For a moment neither of them said anything. The drone hummed quietly overhead. The feed was still live. Across the galaxy, in chambers and ships and homes on 43 worlds, hundreds of thousands of beings were watching a small human child stand between a loaded weapon and a dragon, looking up at a commander with 9 years of combat experience, and showing no particular sign of being worried about either of them. "He's sad," Ren said. "Not mean." She said it the way she said things she had already finished thinking about, plain and direct and without decoration. "There's a difference." Sale stared at her. She had answers ready. She had files and records and 2 destroyed warships and a cracked moon and 300 soldiers who could not get within 300 meters of him. She had 9 years of reasons why this creature was not sad, was not anything that had feelings that words like sad applied to, was a danger that needed to be ended before it moved again and hurt someone. She looked at the child in front of her. She looked past the child at Vorix, who had his eyes open now, ember-colored and steady, watching the space where Ren stood without moving a single scale. She looked at her own sensor readings again. The numbers that refused to be what they were supposed to be. She thought about the footage from the drone. The kiss on the nose. The numbers dropping. The way he had shifted just now, not to attack but to cover. Neil said nothing. He just stood to the side and watched Sale with the patient expression of a man who had made his point and was willing to let it sit. The rifle came down slowly. Not all the way. Sale was not careless, had never been careless in her life, and 9 years did not disappear in a moment. But the barrel dropped from ready position to low, and she held it there, and she looked at Ren for another long moment. "What is your name?" Sale said. "Ren," said Ren. Sale looked at her for another moment. Then she looked at Vorix. Then she looked at the sensor readings one more time, as if she was checking to make sure they still said what they said. They still said what they said. She exhaled slowly through her nose. It was a very controlled exhale, the kind that came from long practice at staying composed when composure was difficult. "Nobody fires," she said to her soldiers. Her voice was flat and final. "Stand down." The line relaxed by degrees, rifles lowering one after another, and the crater was quiet again except for the drone and the wind coming in slow off the wheat fields and Vorix breathing, slow and deep, behind the small girl who had walked out to stand between him and everything that wanted to end him. The meeting that changed everything lasted 4 hours. It was not the longest session the Galactic Council had ever held. It was not the loudest, though there were moments in the second hour that came close. But it was, by the account of most delegates who were present that day, the strangest, because it was the first time in living memory that a council vote had been influenced primarily by footage of a child sitting in a dirt field talking to something that could have killed her, and choosing not to. Pell opened the session by playing the drone footage from beginning to end without comment. All of it. Ren walking into the crater, the wildflowers, the long quiet hour, the kiss on the nose, the exhale that turned the ground to glass, Ren standing between Sale's rifle line and Vorix with her hands loose at her sides, saying 4 words that the translation systems had rendered perfectly in 43 languages. "He's sad, not mean." When the footage ended, Pell set down his notes and looked around the chamber. "We have a decision to make," he said. "And I would like us to make it carefully." The Moran delegate spoke first as he usually did. He still wanted containment. Not bombardment. He had quietly dropped the bombardment argument somewhere in the third hour of watching the drone feed, though he had not announced this. But containment. A secure facility. Monitoring. The kind of arrangement that put distance between Vorax and any populated world and kept it there. The human delegate Prue stood up and asked one question. She asked it in a calm voice, looking directly at the Moran delegate. Contained by who? She said. You watched the same footage I watched. You saw what happened when 6 armed soldiers landed 20 meters away from him. You want to build a facility that holds that. I want to know who you are planning to send to do it. The Moran delegate did not have an answer that satisfied anyone, including himself. It was Counselor Dara from Veth Prime who raised the charter. She was old, even by Veth Prime standards, and she spoke slowly and chose her words the way someone chose tools. Picking the right one for the specific job, not grabbing whatever was nearest. She had been on the council for 30 years. She had seen it make good decisions and poor ones and had learned to tell the difference mostly by watching what happened afterward. She pulled up a document that most of the chamber had never seen before because it was very old and very rarely used. The Sovereign Being Charter had been written 400 years ago by a coalition of species who had encountered, in the course of early galactic expansion, beings that did not fit the existing categories, not citizens, not animals, not threats, not allies, not any of the boxes that galactic law had been built around. The charter said, in careful and precise language, that when a being demonstrated the capacity for individual experience, memory, loss, connection, grief, it was entitled to recognition as a sovereign individual regardless of whether it belonged to a species with a seat at the table. Dara said she believed the footage demonstrated all 4. The vote was not unanimous. The Moran delegate abstained. 2 others voted against. But the rest of the chamber voted for, and when the count was confirmed, Pell recorded it in the session log in the same dry, careful handwriting he used for everything. Vorax the Ashen, sovereign being, protected status, Havelock's Reach designated a protected zone under council charter. The session ended. People filed out. Pell stayed behind and looked at the empty chamber for a while before turning off the lights. On Havelock's Reach, nobody told Neil Holt what the council had decided. He found out 3 days later when a formal notification arrived through the repaired relay tower on the eastern ridge. He read it twice at the kitchen table, folded it, and put it in the drawer where he kept the important documents. Then he went out to the barn and started measuring timber. He did not explain to Sam what he was building at first. Sam watched him work for 2 days before asking, and Neil said he was building a water trough. Sam pointed out that they already had 3 water troughs and none of the current animals needed a 4th one. Neil said this one was bigger. Sam looked at the dimensions his father had marked on the timber and did the arithmetic in his head and went quiet. He helped with the building after that without being asked. It took them a week. When it was finished, it sat at the edge of the burned circle, which had not been replanted and which Neil did not plan to replant. It was the largest structure on the farm. It held more water than the house's entire supply tank. Neil filled it with the pump and stepped back and looked at it and said nothing. The next morning it was half empty. He filled it again and did not mention it to anyone. Ren visited every day. This had been true from the beginning and it stayed true through the weeks that followed, through the slow, careful process of Vorax healing, the wings straightening by degrees, the silver bleeding stopping entirely by the 3rd week, the cracked scales on his side beginning to close over with new growth, darker than the surrounding scales and slightly smoother. The way scar tissue was always slightly different from the original. She came after school and on weekends and on the days when school was cancelled for weather, and she always came through the back gate and across the burned ground and sat down near his nose and talked. She talked about everything. About school, about the lessons she found boring and the ones she found interesting, about a disagreement she had with a girl in her class that she was still working out how she felt about. About the bird that was still nesting in the broken water trough because her father still had not fixed it. She brought things sometimes, not always food because she was not entirely sure what Draconeth ate and did not want to guess wrong, but other things. A smooth flat stone with a stripe of white quartz through the middle. A drawing she had done in art class of the farm from above, slightly crooked, the proportions not quite right, the new large trough at the edge of a dark circle that she had colored with the darkest pencil in the set. She left the drawing in front of his nose one afternoon when she had to go in early for dinner. It was gone the next morning. She never found it anywhere in the crater. She did not ask about it. Dr. Aldrich arrived 6 weeks after the council vote. He came from the university station near Veth Prime, a small man with careful hands and the particular kind of focused energy that belonged to people who spent most of their time thinking about one specific thing. He had 17 published papers and 40 years of fieldwork studying interspecies communication and behavior, and he had watched the drone footage so many times before arriving that he could have described any frame of it from memory. He set up his equipment at a respectful distance from the crater and spent his days watching and measuring and writing notes in a small book he kept in his breast pocket. He had long quiet conversations with Neil on the farmhouse porch in the evenings. He asked careful questions and listened to the answers properly the way good researchers listened, not waiting for the part that confirmed what they already thought but actually listening. He asked Neil one evening in the 5th week how Ren had known what to do. Neil was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the dark shape at the edge of the field, the faint warm glow of Voryx's scales visible even at this distance in the evening dark, the way coals were visible in a banked fire. She didn't know anything, Neil said. She didn't have a plan. She didn't read anything about how to approach a Draconeth. She just walked out there because something was hurt. Aldrich wrote that down. He went home 6 weeks later and spent 4 months writing the longest paper of his career. He checked it more times than he had checked anything before submitting it, because he was a careful man and the conclusion he had reached was not a small one and he wanted to be sure he had earned it. The conclusion, after all the data and the measurements and the careful scientific language of 40 years of training, was this. Every species the galactic community had encountered in 400 years of exploration had, as its first response to an unknown danger, some version of the same instinct. Assess, protect, prepare. Understand the threat first. Act after. Humans, in a statistically significant number of documented cases, did something different. They responded to suffering before they finished calculating the risk. Not because they did not understand the danger, in many cases they understood it perfectly well, but because the suffering registered first and registered louder and the response came before the calculation was complete. It was not logical. It was not efficient. It did not make sense from a survival standpoint, and Aldrich spent several pages of the paper explaining why it should not work, and yet demonstrably, repeatedly, across dozens of documented cases, it did. He could not find a name for it in any scientific literature. He called it comfort first response and noted in the final paragraph that when he had described it to several humans during his research and asked them what they called it, most of them had looked at him with genuine confusion and said they did not know it needed a name. The drone that had recorded the original footage had long since been recovered and recharged and sent back on routine patrol. But it made one final pass over Havelock's Reach on the last evening of Aldrich's stay, running an automated survey, and its camera caught one last image before the light failed. Ren asleep. She had fallen asleep the way children fell asleep when they were truly comfortable. Suddenly and completely, one moment present and the next simply gone, her head resting on her folded arms against the warm dark flank of the largest and most dangerous creature the galaxy had ever recorded. Her jacket had ridden up slightly. Her mismatched laces were untied. Voryx was not asleep. His ember-colored eyes were open and they were looking outward, away from the farm and away from the crater and away from the wheat fields and up, into the wide dark above Havelock's Reach where the stars were clear and very bright this far from the core. His wings were folded. His breathing was slow and even. Every threat sensor on the drone read low, calm, settled. He was keeping watch. Not because anyone had asked him to. Not because it was an arrangement or an agreement or anything that had been discussed. Just because there was something small and sleeping pressed against his side and the night was dark and that was reason enough. The drone recorded the image and moved on. Somewhere in the galaxy a paper was being finished. Somewhere a council charter was being filed. Somewhere 43 species were still arguing about what any of it meant and what to call it and how to write it into law. On a small farm at the edge of charted space, a child slept warm against a dragon's side, and the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy watched the stars and made sure nothing would disturb her until morning.